Thank you very much for inviting me. I did have something I was going to say. Most of them have been said already. It's that sort of time of the day, but I'd just like to, I'm going to talk about a police officer's particular point of view. You might be surprised to hear what it is. First of all, I agree with almost everything Shani Chakrabarti said this morning, and almost everything David Davis said this morning, which is a bit worrying. Nevertheless, I do disagree with this hoovering up of vast quantities of data, and I disagree with it on a number of fronts, starting from the intrusion into an individual's private life, but moving across a whole other range of problems. Why are we doing it? What's the business case to do it? Is it worth it? I'm not going to go into the difficulty of doing it and the cost of doing it. We've heard about all that. The legality of doing it, but the practicality of what we would do with all this data. A recollection from my time as a real policeman was that whenever you had a specialist task, whether it be a firearms officer, an anti-terrorist officer, a traffic officer, a search officer, whatever the specialism was, you would employ somebody on that task with enthusiasm and interest, and they would tackle that specialist issue. And what we see here, I think, is exactly that. Specialist people looking at their problem in isolation to the balance of the rest of society's interests. Yes, there is no doubt that access to this data would assist some people sometimes. Very rarely, I think. What doesn't happen, because we heard this morning, basically because the strategic decision makers either don't understand the technology, or they don't understand the police investigative process, or they don't understand the legal process, and therefore no balance, no proportionality is put onto the step. The step is taken because it's there, not what happens, what is the result of that. And that's what I think we're seeing. I don't think it's Machiavellian. I think it's enthusiastic people taking on a task which we would hope to be done properly, which is safeguarding our safety. And I think we have to remember at the end of today, it may be that we have to accept there will be terrorist incidents, but we can balance that because we're going to live in a much freer and much more safer personal society. So we keep all this data. What are we going to do with it? Well, of course, we're going to start mining it in various ways. It's there, it's got to be done. That takes us down a whole range of possible potential routes. Wrong identities, technologically or personally. It takes us into associations that are totally innocent. What I'm pretty sure it won't do is catch the top level organised criminal and terrorist. Because as soon as they realise their data's being kept, surprise, surprise, they won't use that process. I mean, we've already had the throwaway mobile phone, use it once, throw it in a canal. There's the dead drops we heard about this morning. Indeed, by this system, the Royal Mail will be the operation of choice. And I think we ought to, quite simply, ask citizens, if you post a letter, is it going to be okay for the Royal Mail to steam it over, copy it and keep a file? And the answer would be no. They'd be horrified. It's the same principle. So the issue is, what are we going to do with the data? Now, this is where it gets quite difficult. Because the police service do need access to data. You know, it's a fact of life, and if we are going to catch criminals and convict them, then there needs to be a process and a way to get at data. And therefore, the key to this is about access, it's about safeguards and controls, and it's not about hoovering up data and keeping it in one place just in case. It's interesting, if you hear the current police policy position on this, is that we're not talking about accessing content. We've heard the problem with that. We want to know the who, the when and the where. And this data should only be accessed when it should be accessed, and we would expect there to be strict judicial safeguards. What I hear there is a comment by somebody who probably fits into some of the boxes we've heard about this morning, who understands what they need to do, but doesn't understand the complexity of where it takes us. And I think Home Secretaries come into the court by the same catch-22. They can see it should be done, and it seems quite simple. But until you get a group of real experts looking at this, it can take you somewhere where you don't want to go. So, I guess I would finish by saying, the world is moving very fast with the different types of communication. We've heard of them all today. And therefore we've got to find a way to allow good investigators to investigate. We've got to find a way to allow good investigators to identify suspects. It's very well for Shami to say, I wouldn't mind this data being used if I was a suspect. You've got to get to the point of being a suspect, which requires some investigation. So it's a very difficult area to approach. But the bottom line is, mass collection won't work. It'll be vastly expensive. In fact, more resources will have to be put into dealing with it than actually getting out there and investigating what it is we're supposed to be investigating. So I think I end up probably agreeing with things that were said this morning. I would just pick David Davis up on one point. I think he said that the Glasgow bombers were identified by the comms traffic of the bombers of 7/7 or was it 21/7, whichever. That sentence tells you that there was a capture of data, an analysis of the data, and that therefore people were targeted because of that data. I'm afraid it has to happen somehow. The how, the judicial safeguards, and the absolutely punitive control of that access is what we should be trying to achieve.